chapters 14 through 18. Let's go ahead and welcome Craig up.
Just one more sec here. Just one more sec here. Just give me one more sec.
Oh my goodness.
Alright, yo, what is up, guys? Chris, are we good back there? We're good? Yep, alright. So, as Erica said, my name is Craig, or should I say, Craig-a-Los. I'm a senior here. Most of you guys should know me. On Wednesday nights, I'm usually the really loud, obnoxious guy. No big deal. So, like Erica said, we're going to be kicking off this week with chapters 14 through 18. And we're going to go ahead and get into our summary. So, you want to go to the next slide? Alright, so starting in chapter 14, some of the quick overviews I want to do is when Jesus fed 5,000. And so this was when a giant crowd had showed up and Jesus began to heal all of their sick. And by the time that he was done healing everyone, it was getting late, so rather than sending them all home, he actually was able to feed them through a miracle. And so he took 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish, and when he blessed them, the disciples were able to give them out to everyone, and everyone was able to eat as much as they wanted. As well, in chapter 14, we saw Jesus walks on water. And so Jesus told his disciples to go on ahead of him, to cross over the lake. And late at night, they were caught up in this giant storm in which they actually saw Jesus walking towards them. And they were extremely scared at first by this, but eventually Peter was able to step out in faith to actually go walk on the water with him. And we'll be talking more about that later. The faith of a Gentile woman was in chapter 15. And so this was when a Gentile woman had approached Jesus because her daughter was possessed by a demon, and she was asking for her daughter to be healed. And Jesus was kind of just like, get away from me. I came for the Lord's people. I came for the Jews. But through her faith that she displayed, he was willing to help her. And then also in chapter 15, Jesus heals many people. And this was just another occurrence of where we saw Jesus healing many, many, many people in a large crowd. Moving on to chapter 16, we saw Peter's declaration about Jesus. And this was, Jesus had asked them, who do the people see me as? And they said, oh, some people see you as John the Baptist, some people see you as a prophet, blah, blah, blah. And Peter said, and Jesus asked, who do you see me as? And Peter replies, Lord, I see you as the Messiah, the Son of the living God. And then we have Jesus predicting his own death. So this was the first time that Jesus had told all of his disciples that he was planning that he had to go back to Jerusalem, in which he would be tortured and eventually killed, hung on the cross. But he also told them at this point that he would be raised from the dead on the 3rd day. Going into chapter 17, I just picked the Transfiguration, which was really awesome. We're going to get a lot more into that later. But basically, Jesus took Peter and his brothers up to a mountain where he revealed himself in a new way that we're going to talk about. Then, lastly, chapter 18, we have the greatest in the kingdom. And so this was, the disciples had asked Jesus, Lord, who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? And to which he replied, the greatest in the kingdom of heaven is those who are like children, those who are as humble as children. And he also replies that, those who are the greatest are those who are accepting of these children and welcome them in as they welcome me in. And then lastly, in chapter 18, we have the parable of the unforgiving debtor, this was a story of a king who had summoned his servant, and, his servant owed him millions of dollars. He was in huge debt to him, and, the servant, got down on his hands and knees, and he was begging, he was like, Lord, I please just give me a little bit more time, I will pay off this debt, I just need more time. And what ended up happening was the king actually forgave him of this debt, but however, the servant turned around to another servant who had owed him money and was not forgiving of him. So we're going to go ahead and get into highlights for today. So my first one is actually just walking out on the water, and so I just want to get into our Bibles. So if everyone can open up to Matthew chapter 14, and Jesus walks on water starts at verse 22. Good?
What's the verse?
If you guys have the Bible from the church, I don't know about the Blue Bible. Does anyone know what pages it is on the Blue Bible?
What's the verse?
What page is it?
546.
There you go, 5:46. Yeah, so chapter 14, starting at verse 22. Alright, so it starts out and it says, immediately after this, Jesus insisted that his disciples go back into the boat and cross the other side of the lake. So, and we'll read a bit more. While he sent the people home. And so Jesus had decided to stay behind as he was sending his disciples out across the lake. And obviously Jesus knew what was coming, right? And we all know, if we read on, it says, it says, he went up into the hills by himself to pray. Night fell while he was there alone. Meanwhile, the disciples were in trouble far away from land, right? So we know that as the disciples are out there, there's this huge storm that happens as they're out there. And Jesus knew this beforehand, because he's all-knowing. Obviously, he knew it was going to happen. And yet still, he tells his disciples, go on ahead without me. I'm going to stay behind, send everyone home, and I'm going to go up and pray by myself. And then, as these disciples are out there, it says, at about 3 o'clock in the morning, Jesus came toward them walking on the water. Now, when the disciples saw him walking on the water, they were absolutely terrified. And in their fear, they cried out, "It's a ghost." And this is, really interesting because, right, it's a miracle that Jesus is performing. He's out here walking on water, and it's something that these disciples have never seen before. It's something that we can't even comprehend would be possible because it's a liquid and you would just fall through. And so their first instinct is to immediately think that it's something bad, it's a ghost, it's something unnatural. But then, Jesus began to speak to them, and he says, "Do not be afraid," he said. "Take courage, for I am here." And then Peter calls out to him and says, "Lord, if it is really you, tell me to come to you walking on the water." To which Jesus replies, "Yes, come." And this is really cool because Jesus takes the miracle that he was performing himself, and he not only is performing himself, but he allows his disciple, Peter, to join in that miracle with him simply by Peter asking him. Now, this is just, all three of these highlights that I'm going to be talking about are all miracles that Jesus did. And walking on the water is probably one of my favorite miracles that Jesus has ever performed. And we're going to be getting into that a lot more with the application. So we're going to go ahead and move on to the second one, which is the Transfiguration. Now that is in chapter 17, and it's the first verse in chapter 17. We good? Yeah? Alright, cool. So, the Transfiguration, this is something that, personally, I didn't even know happened until I read it, right? I started reading and I was like, holy crap, like this was crazy reading. So, let's go ahead and get into it. It says, 6 days later, Jesus took Peter and the two brothers, James and John, and led them up a high mountain to be alone. As the men watched, Jesus' appearance was transformed, so that his face shone like the sun, and his clothes became as white as light. And this is like crazy to me, right? Because as soon as I read this, the first thing I thought of was, like back in the Old Testament when God would show up, and it describes him as when he came and spoke to people like on mountains and stuff, he would show up as this bright light that, when he showed up to Abraham had to cover himself because he literally couldn't even look at God. And so that's immediately what I thought of here with the Transfiguration is Jesus showing himself as God in his physical form. And then continuing on, it says, suddenly Moses and Elijah appeared and began talking with Jesus. So, and again, something I had no idea even really happened was these two prophets coming back and just having a conversation with them, which is cool. And then Peter exclaimed, "Lord, it is wonderful for us to be here. If you want, I'll make 3 shelters as memorials, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." Now, what I think is interesting is something that's about to happen. So right now we're at a point where, these 3 men are standing up here with Jesus and these 2 prophets who just appeared, right? And he's looking at Jesus, or all 3 of them are looking at Jesus in all of their glory. And, along with these 2 prophets that just, appeared. And they're not scared. In the Bible we always see, just when an angel appears, people are scared. And it's really interesting that Peter, isn't like, bro, I'm scared. He's like, "Oh Lord, I'm gonna build some memorials for you guys. I'm gonna get some work done for you. I'm here for you, Jesus." But then when we go on to verse 5, it says, "But even as he spoke, a bright cloud overshadowed them, and a voice from the cloud said, 'This is my dearly loved son, who brings me great joy. Listen to him.'" Now at this, right, by a cloud showing up, which was the voice of God, but still a cloud showing up, the disciples were terrified and fell face down on the ground. I personally think that's pretty crazy. That's what made them scared. Obviously, all of it would make us scared because, God's pretty scary. I'm not gonna lie, no cap. No cat. And then Jesus came over and touched them, and he said, "Get up." He said, "Do not be afraid." And when they looked up, Moses and Elijah were gone, and they saw only Jesus. Now, when it says they saw only Jesus, what I'm presuming from this is that he was back in his just normal, looked like a human, normal self, and so it was just no big deal. But yeah, so that's really cool for me. And then third highlight is both times fed people. So I didn't really want to pick just one specific one. We'll just be reading one specific one, but they're both very similar. So we're going to go to, where did I say it was? We'll go back to chapter 14 and look at Jesus feeds 5,000. So this starts at verse 13. And he says, actually we're going to jump down to, verse 15. So it says, "That evening the disciples came to him and said, 'This is a remote place and is already getting late. So send the crowds away so they can go to the villages and buy food for themselves.' But Jesus replied, 'This isn't necessary. You feed them.'" Right? Now, it says there's 5,000 people here, right? But what the Bible's really implying is that there were 5,000 men here. That doesn't include all of the women and children that were there as well. So there could have been thousands of more people there other than just the 5,000. And so, just imagine being a disciple and you're sitting here talking to Jesus and you're like, "Hey Jesus, we got thousands of people here, we got to send them home. They got to eat somehow, right?" And Jesus simply looks at you and he goes, "Nah, you feed them." How are you going to do that, right? And so what happens is, let's see. He says, they reply, "But we have only 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish, they answered. And Jesus says, "Bring them here," he said. Then he told the people to sit down on the grass. Jesus took the 5 loaves and 2 fish, looked up toward heaven, and blessed them. Then, breaking the loaves into pieces, he gave the bread to his disciples, who distributed it to the people. They all ate as much as they wanted, and afterwards the disciples picked up 12 baskets of leftovers. So this is, every time I read this, and I've read this a few times, but every time I read it, I think of what they did was they broke the bread, after Jesus had blessed it, they broke the bread and gave it to each other, but in my head I'm like, where does the extra bread come from? When you break it, does it just regrow? It's something that I can't really wrap my head around, and it's not something that the Bible really specifies how it happens, but it's just so miraculous to look at this and see that Jesus was able to do this, right? It takes 5 loaves of bread and how many fish was it? And 2 fish, right? That's it. And yet they fed thousands of people with just this little amount of food, and then they still had 12 baskets of leftovers, which, that's a basket per disciple. So they all ate pretty good that night, that. That's my third miracle, or my third highlight, which all these were miracles. And that was what really stood out to me through this. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to get onto our applications. So my first one, I'm calling it Walk Out to Jesus. Now this is going back to the story of Jesus walking on water, and what I really want to dive into with this is the idea that, the disciples were out here, they were on a lake, and they're chilling, rowing, just on their way over this lake, and all of a sudden this storm hits them, right? And Jesus wasn't with them, right? Before, in the past we saw there was a storm, and Jesus was with them, and they immediately were able to ask Jesus to calm the storm. Boom, easy, done, right? But at this point, the disciples were in trouble, far away from land, which the Bible tells us, it says, it literally says that the disciples were in trouble, far away from land. It literally says that. But then they were also, not only far away from land, they were far away from Jesus. And so, while they were out on the water, this great storm started all around them, and they probably, had no idea really what they were going to do. When all of a sudden, Jesus shows up, to them, walking out on the water, and like we said earlier, at first they didn't realize it was Jesus, but then eventually they did, right? But now, this is something that really got me, was when Jesus showed up, he didn't calm the storm immediately, right? Jesus showing up wasn't enough for the storm. I mean, it could be enough, right? Jesus is enough. He's always enough. He can do anything. But Jesus showing up in this situation didn't calm the storm. It wasn't enough. And so, at this point, Peter asked Jesus to call him out of the boat. And when Jesus told him to come, Peter starts to step out of the boat, and he's stepping out on what? Just straight blind faith. There's like, imagine us, like I would never look at a pool of water and be like, yeah, I can walk on this. Boom. Like that's crazy. And he saw Jesus doing that, but still, that takes absolute blind faith to be able to do that. But he was able to do it. He started walking out towards Jesus on the water. And so, one thing that I have for you guys is that even in the midst of the storm, we have to have faith to walk out onto the water with Jesus, but we have to keep our eyes on him. So, when Peter, right, he was walking out to Jesus, but he didn't make it all the way. Why? Because Peter took his eyes off of Jesus, okay? And so, he started focusing on the storm that was around him, the problems that were encompassing around him, this big storm. And as soon as he was focusing on that, instead of focusing on Jesus, he immediately began to sink into the water. Now, even though he was starting to sink, right, this is really cool. He immediately calls out to God. He's like, God, Lord Jesus, help me. I need you right now. And the Bible says, immediately, Jesus reaches out, grabs him, pulls him back up, right? And that's, immediately, saves him from his troubles. He's immediately saved. And so I think in the same way as this is describing to about this, it also can be applied to us. And so I think Jesus, just like he was calling Peter out of the boat, I think Jesus is calling us out of the boat, or as we could put in more modern day terms or more realistic terms, Jesus is calling us out of our comfort zone, so that we can step into something new. All right, Jesus is calling us out of our comfort zone so that he can call us into a miracle. And then, however, right, so this is really hard for people, right? It's called comfort zone for a reason. It's where we're comfortable and where we stay, where we feel like we're safe. And so when we step out of our comfort zone, what's the opposite of comfort? Uncomfort, right? Exactly. Discomfort, right? So, it's not something that we like doing, but Jesus says, hey, go ahead, just step out of your comfort zone, and I'm going to call you into what I have for you. And then, this is happening, and then what we realize is, or what we should realize is that, we shouldn't have fear or doubt when we're stepping out of our comfort zone, when we're stepping into something new, because we should have the knowledge that even when we start to sink, just as Peter started to sink, Jesus was immediately there to save him. And so, when we're stepping out of our comfort zone, we shouldn't have the fear of, oh, what if this happens? Oh, what if this happens? Sure, it might happen. Things might go bad. Things always go bad in life. But we can have the faith that Jesus will be there to save us every time. Going to the next application. All right, this one I'm calling Remember God's Miracles. This one is pretty dang cool. So we're going to go to chapter 16, verse 5. And so this is under the yeast of the Pharisees and Sadducees. So here, Jesus and his disciples were crossed over to the other side of this lake right after they had just fed all these people for the second time, by the way. And so, and this was immediately after. They were going out and they were going across the lake. And they realized that they had come all this way and they didn't even bring any bread. They had just fed thousands of people and they forgot to bring bread with them. And so at this discovery, all the disciples began to argue and created trouble for themselves out of nothing except for their worry. Their worry about not having bread caused them to start fighting and having arguments and all this stuff. And then, so when they started to focus on their worries, rather than having faith in Jesus, who, by the way, was literally with them. Jesus was literally standing there with them. When they did this, it caused them to forget all of the miracles that Jesus had done previously. And so at seeing this, Jesus said, "You have so little faith." He says, "Why are you arguing with each other about having no bread?" He calls them out on their lack of faith caused by their worry. And so then Jesus follows this up and he says, "Don't you remember the 5,000 I fed with 5 loaves? Don't you remember the 4,000 I fed with 7 loaves?" And so when we worry in our lives, God's looking down on us, and I think he's looking at us, he's saying, "Don't you remember what I got you through? Don't you remember what I have done for you?" And, so when worry strikes us, I think what we need to do is, rather than drowning in our own fears and forgetting what God has done, we should stand before our worries with faith as we remember everything that God has done for us in the past. And not only this, but we should stand with confidence, praising God, not only for what He has already done for us, but praising God for we know that He will be able to get us through whatever we're going through right now. And then my third application is forgive but correct. So this goes to chapter 18, and it goes to verse 15, which is correcting another believer. And so this is really talking about, it's saying, I'll just read it for you guys. It says, if another believer sins against you, go privately and point out the offense. If the other person listens and confesses it, you have won that person back. But if you are unsuccessful, take one or two others with you and go back again, so that everything you say may be confirmed by 2 or 3 witnesses. So, what this is really saying is, and just straight up, this is just reading the Bible. It's just a straight application given to you right there. And so, for me, what it's saying is, when you're having a disagreement with someone and you feel like they've hurt you or sinned against you or something, the Bible says that the best thing you can do is simply confront them about that situation and talk it over. Like tell them, hey, you hurt me, you sinned against me, this kind of stuff, and you talk to them and you try and get them into that. It's just about that conversation. But it also says to first do this in private, which means that we shouldn't be going out and getting all our friends involved with this drama and all this stuff at first. It's something that needs to be private and just between the two people who are in the situation. However, then it goes on, it says, unless there can be no agreement reached with that person, right? In this situation, then a good option is to take, 2 or 3 believers, as it says, and to bring this counsel into the conversation so that it can be more of a conversation between a group to really figure out, who's in the right, who's in the wrong, what's really going on in the situation. But so no matter the outcome, what's important is that we need to be able to simply forgive them. All right? So this ties into exact same chapter 18. It goes into the parable of the unforgiving debtor, right? We're going all the way to the end of it, and it says, verse 33, shouldn't you have mercy on your fellow servant, just as I had mercy on you? And so, it was really saying, as Christians, I've heard this from Alan Dow, who's one of my mentors. He's a really cool, awesome dude. He says, as Christians, I feel like we are more responsible to forgive people than the normal person, because we are in a position where we fully believe that God has forgiven us for everything that we have done, and so why would we not want to forgive people for the simple things that they've done against us? And so, as I said earlier, it's not something where you should. Actually, I didn't say this earlier. Hold on. So it's not a situation where you should walk into this and someone hurts you and you just go, oh, I'll forgive them, and you leave it at that, right? And just leave the situation alone. Don't talk about it, right? Because the Bible, we just read this. The Bible says to confront them about it, to actually go and talk about it. But what is important is that you also are able to forgive them. And so, to prove this, it says also in the parable of the unforgiving debtor, it says that the king brought his servant in to discuss his debt, right? At first, he didn't want to forgive him, right? At first, it was about, this debt that he had still owed him. And so the king brought his servant in, and they had that one-on-one conversation about it. But still, at the end of that conversation, the king still forgave him. So it's really important that we need to have both of those aspects in that. And that is all I have for you guys. Are there any questions? Your quarter? It's under your foot. No, the other foot. Yeah, there you go. Yeah. My game? You want me to do my game? Alright, I need 6 people. I would like, and we're doing teams, but so I need 3 teams of 2. So I want Evan and Reagan, and I would like Janae and Evan.
What?
Yup. And I would like Zach and Erica.
Erica. Are we all gonna take a spot?
fair for these kids, though.
Erica knows what the game is.
Why, guys?
Alright, so I need one team over here, one team in the middle, and one team on that end. Alright, cool. You guys are in the middle. Alright, so what we're gonna do, we're calling this walking on water.
Hi, I'm Peter.
You're not, yeah, we know, Peter, we know. Alright, so, I have the mic. Thank you, Erica. Thank you. Alright, so, I have the mic ready. Thank you. Alright, so, the way that this game is going to work, you're going to, one of the two of you is going to be blind. And so what you're going to do is you're going to close your eyes, cover your eyes, right? And what the other person has to do is using their voice, they have to direct you through the door. And so the first team to get through the door wins. Nah, they have to open the door themselves. Yep.
Come on, Zach.
Hey, Matt, can you put some chairs around there? Yeah. Alright, so, do you guys have a picture blind person? Him? Alright, so Janae, you're going to direct him how to get to the door. Are you blind? Alright, you're going to direct her how to get to the door. You're blind, she's going to direct you how to get there. Alright.
Go that way.
Oh, perfect.
They're closer.
Wait, how are you going to do that? Alright, put your mask on. Alright, ready? And, hey, whoa, I didn't say. And go! You can't touch them,